All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast today. We've got a very exciting episode. We are going to do a case study on a couple who have sold up, left the big smoke, and they have made a tree change to northern New South Wales. And they've asked the question, have they missed the boat, Ben? Good question.
And Bryce, in the property update section, stick around because I'm going to talk about how close to the bottom of the market are we actually at? Has the media got it wrong?
Good question. Stick around, folks. Let's rip into the show.
Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch. Welcome back to you too, Ben. How are you?
Mate, big week, budget week, getting into the number or getting into the politics of money. It's all exciting, yeah.
And the UK got themselves a new Prime Minister, Ben.
After the shortest ever Prime Minister.
45 days.
44 or 45 days.
45 days.
Liz.
And the new Prime Minister is richer than the King. So there we go. That's just to round out the story. A billionaire Prime Minister.
Now, mate, I've got plenty to say about the budget in regards to that in next week's economic and RBA update. So I won't pull all the gold out, but let's just summarise it quickly. It's a budget for families. It's probably what we would call a Labor budget. There's still plenty of spending in there, which they can't help themselves, but that's both sides of politics these days, to be honest. It also shows you, Bryce, that when you get super mining profits, when you also get businesses going well, and you get full employment, the amount of tax revenues you get is huge. So what's the message here? I'll just one little message before we get into today's show. Grow the pie and you can share more of the pie. So economic activity, economic growth, it's absolutely critical. If we want more schools and hospitals and everything like that, you got to keep growing the economy. Yes. As opposed to keep raising taxes. So that's my little rant there, bro.
There you go. Well, we look forward to hearing more on the RBA update. So that'll go out on what is a public holiday for Victorians who, let's be honest, there's been a lot of reasons why you wouldn't want to live in Victoria over the last 2 years, but recently you get a public holiday for a football game and you get a public holiday for a horse race. So they're probably two bonuses.
Or just remember, it's meant to be a public holiday just in Melbourne, isn't it? I don't think it's full for all of Victoria. Oh. So, I don't think it's a public. So does that mean people in Torquay don't get a public holiday?
Sorry, the line just went a bit fuzzy, mate. I didn't hear what you had to say there. So, no, there's definitely a public holiday in Torquay, let me promise you. But so tune in for that. So you'll have that. If you want to see it on you want to watch Ben do this, go to our Empower Wealth YouTube channel and subscribe to that. If you want to listen, we'll put it up on our podcast platform so you can have a little cheeky listen to that as well. So that'll be good.
Next Tuesday afternoon.
Hey, Ben, we've locked in summer series. So that's just around the corner now. So thank you to those people who put their hands up. If you feel like you've got a really compelling story, go to thepropertycouch.com.au/my story that you want to share, because that was the challenge I put out at the very beginning of the year. Yep. It's not too late. We might be able to sneak you in, but thank you to those folks who have put their hand up to say, yes, we're going to be part of that. So we're super excited to showcase what that looks like. I'm going to ask the question of those summer series guests, Ben, what it's like to have a plan in place and to actually have bought properties, and what is the emotion that you're feeling right now as you go through this changing sentiment environment. So that'll be something for people to definitely tune in and have a listen to real life people who are doing real life investing, who are doing real life planning for their future, Ben. And lo and behold, none of them will have 20 plus properties doing renovations every night and subdivisions and property development spend. They'll be people just like you and me who are building and buying for the long term.
Now, you did a little reach out for the ladies in one of our recent episodes. How did we go? Did we get a response from the ladies, or we need more ladies?
We did, but Ben, we are always happy if that's why I put that little link in there. If there was someone who's got a compelling story, Ben, put your hand up, ladies. We'd definitely love to hear from you. So that is good. And Masterclass, you and I recorded that a little while, Ben. We're in production for that soon. We're going to let everyone know. as soon as that's available, so you can go and check that out as well. But hey, today, Ben, we're talking about we're doing a second of our case study series where we take a deep dive into the details of a client. We've changed their names to keep them innocent and make sure that there's no identification there. But what we've done is found some circumstances that we think can offer some real value. And this is the feedback that our community gave us, that they want to hear more of this.
Yep.
Where they can get into the numbers and the details and the sequencing and all the challenges and the problems and what we had to overcome and how we put that in place so that people can actually do that. So we're going to do that today, and you and I are super excited. So before we get there, my Mindset Minute theme today is this one's from Morgan Housel. Just quoted a few from Morgan Housel, but I like this one. A lot of financial debates, just people with different time horizons talking over each other. I love it, because fundamentally we believe in property at all times because of our time horizon, which is basically minimum 10 years, and that's minimum, right? So our time horizon is allows us to be very bullish about property. But if you've got someone who's a flipper or someone who's got a very short time horizon, they may overlay their particular horizon into the current market and have a different view, right? So if you go back to that quote, a lot of financial debates are just people with different time horizons talking over each other. I loved it. And I was thinking too, as I was talking to our buyers team, if you think back to any time, Ben, let's just go back to 2019, there's a whole bunch of uncertainty around negative gearing and all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
And so there were some opportunities at the time for people to go and buy some really good properties. And now as they looked in the rear vision mirror at that time, like, oh, thank God I did that. The competition was low, bought some great properties, the A grades, they did really well through the pandemic and all of that boom. So I guess if your time horizon is set correctly here, right now we've got clients who are buying and they're taking up some really great opportunities, Ben, because their time horizon is actually anchored in the right headspace, because they go, okay, well, there is some competition that's come off. You're going to talk to auction clearance rates a bit later on in the show, but there is a bit of competition reprieve here. But they're the types of properties that I want to look back in 4 or 5 years' time and say they're the ones that I got, and I got to get them with an environment that was a whole bunch easier to buy in. So, Ben, something for us to think about.
It's a great point, Bryce, and I really like that we're sort of touching on what Morgan Housel was talking about around timing. Yeah, we've obviously been on this podcast a long time talking about minimum term, that sort of 10 years, as you were saying. Medium term, really for us, medium term when we first started out was that sort of 10 to 25 years, and then long term was 25 years and beyond. Well, mate, I've evolved that thinking. Are you ready for it?
I am.
Yeah, your investment timeline should be rest of life. Yes. That's what you've got to deal with, rest of life, right? So that's my new motto around thinking about investing, rest of life. Now, what do we also know about investing? The sooner you start, the better rest of life will be. So I'm gonna sort of, you'll start hearing me talking about rest of life, because this is it's lifestyle by design, and it's rest of life, right? Yeah. So, and assume long life. Long life. Assume a bit of delayed gratification would be a good
advancement in medicine. That means we live longer. Assume a longer time period between finishing effective working life and finishing life. And I think
so I think it's whenever you're thinking of your investment, think rest of life, and how you're building and sequencing those, which is a perfect segue into the story that we're talking about today.
It is a perfect segue. So we've changed the names, Ben. So we're going to talk about Annabelle and Jamie today.
Yep.
But that's not their real name, right? But we are going to talk to them. And here's some of the context for this particular couple, right? They wanted to choose an alternate lifestyle. So they sold up in the big smoke of Sydney. Yep. Sounds like a beginning of an episode of my show, Ben, but they've sold up in the big smoke and they're heading to the bush. So they went to northern New South Wales, and a wonderful part of the world. They've gone into the hinterland here. And so that's a big call to make too, because you're actually selling out of a metropolis into a market that, look, it did well during the pandemic, but over a longer period of time, there's been more of a fluctuation. Now, this particular area is in hot demand, but
it's a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle market, similar to the Torquay story for yourself. And I think the other thing in terms of bringing some context around that is that they are still able thank you to the powers of technology and software, to retain their city jobs and their city incomes and work remotely. And I think that is important to understand here in terms of building some context around Jamie and Annabelle's story.
Yeah, because a lot of people are wondering if it can be done. Well, these two are on very good incomes, Ben.
Yeah.
And they need a laptop and an internet connection to get the job done. So given that they still have that, they were able to do it. So their household income, Ben, is approaching $400,000.
Very healthy. Very
healthy incomes. And their principal place of residence on what they purchased was a couple of million, right? So good circumstances that allow them to still do what they want to do. They've got one child and they have a plan to add more into the family, Ben, another child. So to quote the great Ben Kingsley, you got a plan to become what you plan to become. So setting some context to what these people wanted to achieve, they wanted $120,000 passive income in retirement, but they wanted to retire at 55 and they are now in their late 30s. So they wanted to bring that forward. So you take advantage of the incredible situation that they find themselves in, but retire earlier than typical super ages, preservation ages happen, Ben, where you can get that tax-free income. So they needed to actually build a buffer for that early retirement. So they will need to dip into their own resources for the period of time from 55 until super will kick in to allow this plan to happen. So there's a bit going on here. But I guess the overarching thing that we want to provide as a context here is this is not just about property buying. This is a money map. This is a roadmap for their entire financial household, all of the things that are happening. Got a young child now, want to plan for some more. And as we go through this story, Ben, you'll see there's a few things that we needed to sequence along the way.
Yeah, and also for some additional context, late 30s, just to give you an idea. And what was interesting in terms of reading the notes, so obviously when we're sitting down and we're analysing this, our advisor, in this case, it was the great Brendan Vaughan who put this plan together for these clients. We learn a lot in those initial discovery points in terms of one of the big ones was that they're obviously a very busy professional couple. There was a pandemic that came in the middle of that, which caused a lot of uncertainty. And that caused a delay in what they wanted to start 5 years ago. So, I think to their credit, even though you can't change what happened in the past, they finally pushed go on building a plan of action. And I think the other thing that was also really important in that is that they came to the conclusion that they needed a sounding voice. So a two-way, interaction with an advisor, because they would get trapped in this cycle of, not enough knowledge, maybe, reading the news of the day, getting into that sort of cycle of procrastination. And I think from my point of view, one of the great benefits of basically having a mentor, confidant, guide, coach, advisor, whatever you want to call them, is that they will care a lot about the outcome, but they won't get emotionally attached to that discussion because they're doing this day in and day out. But they want the best for people, but they can't let emotion stop them. They're obviously guiding you around your money habits, behaviors, and how to make that money make more money for you. So it really is a benefit that you get in terms of having someone that you can run that information off and having that sounding board to have some validation on some points and to also be challenged on some of that thinking that happens in that time. And we talk about this, Bryce, as I'm going to high five you on the things that I like that I'm seeing in this household, and I'm going to eyeball you on the things that, it's a delicate way of saying it, but as a trusted advisor and as an accountability partner, that's exactly what you would expect from me. I'm not going to agree with everything you say. If you get an advisor who agrees with everything you say, you're either very good and you should be an advisor, or you should be stepping back and saying, are they just trying to, placate me in terms of, by doing everything that, so, a really good, strong relationship should be one where you can put vulnerability out there and talk about, what is it you're trying to achieve and get some honest feedback around that. And hopefully on what I would call on the more practical, conservative side. If they're sitting back saying, oh, yeah, let's roll with crypto, let's roll with in this aggressive, and it's just completely different to who you are, you probably got the wrong advisor there as well.
Well, to your point too, Ben, the problem that we're trying to solve for this particular couple was the fear of having the too much choice and then getting too attached. So this is some of their own words, right? But what is going to give them the best outcome? And then they'd go and think, well, okay, I want to do this myself. But then what would happen is they would get bogged down and get stuck around being on that loop. So I think to your point about having that confidant or that advisor, what it does, it takes you out of that that mental loop of procrastination, which in some cases, and not necessarily in this case, but it can be a perfectionism loop too, just making sure I make the right decision rather than making a decision. But here's the quote, right? 5 years goes by really fast. This is what they had to say, and because they knew that they had the right instinct, because there was a little bit of regret, Ben, in part of the initial conversation, because they knew they had the right instinct and they had toyed with the idea for years, but they got stuck on the DD. So therefore, what happened is this feeling of we feel like we've missed the boat. And for some people who have watched what's happened to the market over the last couple of years, Ben, I think a lot of people can relate to that if they haven't been in. You've seen the people who are in the market really relish and enjoy that that period of growth. And for those people that were on the outside looking in, you can still feel like you've missed the boat. And I guess we want to labor on that point a little bit, Ben, because in every moment, you always do generally feel like if you have missed a period of growth, you do feel like that. You do feel like you've missed the boat. But history actually shows you. And again, if we go back to Morgan Housel's point about time horizon, if your time horizon is 12 months, maybe. But if your time horizon is minimum 10 years, you only need to go back and have a look at history to show that there has been periods of time where there's been strong growth. There's been periods of time when it's leveled off, but over time, the overwhelming trend is up. And if your time horizon is 10 years, as in this case, because they're late 30s, Ben, they're going to be late 40s in 10 years, whether they do something or not. They're going to be late 50s in 20 years, whether they do something or not. And if you're playing along at home, they're going to be, in 30 years' time, they're going to be, late, late 50s, late 60s. So the important point is you are going to progress through time anyway. So the important point is to actually do something around accumulating some assets along the way to give you some choice. So again, their goal is 120 in passive income. By the time they're 55, so there's a bit of work that they needed to do rather than just doing what they're currently doing.
And I think it's to their credit also. I mean, when you're advising time-poor professionals, which is definitely this couple, there is this sense of I'm on a treadmill and I'm committed to what I'm doing. And through obviously, again, this technology idea, we're able to see a tree change, sea change opportunity present itself. And this is what, when you do get to your late 30s and early 40s, like what does my ideal lifestyle by design look like? And, to their credit, they're sort of saying, if I can achieve that work from a remote location and being able to, retain that, they're going to be, very, very well served in terms of their execution on that. So I just want to shout out to them, obviously, if they're listening along, that what a great move for you, what a great move potentially for your family around that, because you've been able to say, we did get on the treadmill, we lost 5 years of that because, yes, the trade-off is when you're earning that type of income that, there's a lot of effort and a lot of work goes into you just don't earn that money by not doing anything. So they're potentially trying to get a bit of that work-life balance right, and knowing that they're not coming up for auction at 55 and saying we're slaved. Now we've got an amazing retirement. They're actually saying, well, we also want to smell the roses along the journey here, as well as, put ourselves and our family, our growing family, into a better financial position.
But even though they have taken that lifestyle move, there would still be a bunch of anxiety that the money map can give some clarity around too, Ben, because you are moving from the biggest metropolis in this country then over to a regional location. So that does come, you back yourself in that's what you want to do, and life's short, and you really want to tap into these lifestyle locations. But I've been online, both you and I have been online, we've seen the house that they live in. It's a gorgeous property on a couple of acres, but they also have a second dwelling on that property, which was part of the planning, because you've got, obviously, there's a mortgage as part of that, but there's also the ability to get an income, and the income that was used was conservative. In fact, instead of going aggressive on what that second income could be, we purposely went conservative on it, Ben, so that there is further upside, but the planning is around on a lower number, so that they could also feel that sense of comfort around the decision that they've made and what that looks like for their plans.
It's making the invisible visible. And to Annabelle's credit, again, name changed to protect the innocent. That was an intention in reading through the notes. It was a discussion that was had about, look, it could be 80, but we want to be more conservative about that, or it could be 50. So they've dropped that down roughly by about half to be able to sort of say, so if in the event that we don't want to rent it out, or we do want to rent it out sporadically, or whatever that looks like, ultimately that gives them that choice and that flexibility in terms of the lifestyle property that they've bought in that location. So that's probably a really nice sort of scene setter. Let's talk through the sequencing, Bryce.
Yeah, good one. And
sorry, not the sequencing.
I speak, Ben. I knew what you're talking about. But as we lead into that, Ben, there's a couple of big ticket items that we needed to address here for them in terms of the sequencing and what this money map allowed them to get some clarity around. One, they definitely wanted to build a portfolio of property. They do have shares and other investments, but they definitely wanted to build property, and they hadn't got there as yet. So that was important. Yep. 2, they were at a stage where they had 1 young child and they wanted to expand the family. 3, they wanted to retire as early as possible. That was the plan. And 4, they also had a secondary income as part of their principal place of residence. So there's a few things that needed to be tested here. But I guess in terms of the sequencing, it's really important to get this in order, Ben, to make sure that the whole plan comes together. And I think this sequencing, you've said it a couple of times, we've said it a couple of times, that it's in the sequencing where you get the real clarity around the map for your life, because get any of these around the wrong way. And part of that was, when do we have the second child, and what impact does that have on borrowing capacities, and what impact does that have on us buying more property? So there's a few things for them to consider, Ben.
Yeah. So what we are talking about here is moving into that new property. The property was, what one might say, a little bit of datedness in that property. So they wanted to, tidy up that property and use a bit of their cash. One of the other things that's really strong in this particular story is, obviously, with that really high income and also selling out of a big city location, they had a really low loan to value ratio. They had very good savings, and they had very, very strong cash flow surplus. So in this type of situation, if anyone's listening and playing along at home, low LVR, high incomes, high surplus means that you're going to be able to borrow quite a significant amount of money. And it also means, given you've got equity in your existing home, that you will be able to move quickly, and you'll be able to move. And so this is a fairly recent plan. And so when we think about, here's some cash, so we used a bit of cash for those renovations in the earlier stages, in terms of getting that second dwelling up and ready for potential Airbnb or bed and breakfast type stays. So that's all good. And then you're sort of like, okay, well, here we are in October of 2022 as we're recording this, and we've actually got strong borrowing power. So that first asset can be significant. Now, here's the important point here. We've traded moving out of a big capital city area, which, based on the gross production that you get out of that area, is what the land is ultimately going to be worth. So if you're going to trade for that and move to another location where you've got more volatility in a lifestyle location, when everything's going really well, this lifestyle location itself is always under demand. It's where some of the rich and famous can potentially like to hang out, right? But coming back to the point, I want to get, as an advisor, I want to see that client grab a significant asset in one of our two biggest cities. Melbourne or Sydney is where I want to park that money, because ultimately they are the engine rooms of our great economy in this country, and that is not going to stop anytime soon. So if you think about, what Melbourne's delivering in terms of, it's going to be the biotech hub of the Asia Pac. If you're thinking about Sydney, it's the financial markets and the financial capital markets of Australia. And then obviously you've got, very, very big multinationals in both of those centres. So, and they're also knowledge centres. So the best education, the best universities, so all of those things bode well for really long-term future growth, future population growth. So the first asset we're talking about is a $1.3 million property that's very, very focused on capital growth.
Yes.
And I'm not talking about capital growth in the next 6 months, in the next 12 months. I'm talking 30 plus years of capital growth is what this asset is being designed to deliver. So it can move through the cycles. Its land is going to be well proportioned in terms of being in that sort of inner or middle ring area of those types of centres. And so that's going to give you that opportunity, and it's going to be rentable, for the young professionals who like the inner city lifestyle and whatever thing. So in my mind, I sort of picture, a townhouse 3-bedroom, or an old period style semi-detached, maybe 2-bedroom extension out the back, flowing into a sort of bit of an outdoor garden area. So an entertainers type property for young professionals who might want to rent that. So that's the picture I'm painting. The target growth is 7.5% long term. And of course, you are trading off the yield in that particular market at that time. So long-term yields is very conservative, sitting at 2.5%. So you can see an overall, compounded return of around 10% with that blend of growth and yield.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think I double down on everything you just said there around making sure that you get that foothold back into those big metropolises. But we generally don't model over 7%, Ben. So you just noticed people just listen, you said 7.5. The reason being is for all the reasons you just talked about. We're getting closer in, and we've back tested scores and scores and scores of these properties, Ben, and they've performed over a long period of time. So we're going back to time horizon here at well in excess of that 7.5%. So people say, well, is that going to happen going forward? Always what happened in the past? Well, I think there's an element of rising tide lifted all ships over the past few decades, largely for reasons we've talked about many times: organic income growth in the household, organic expense reduction in the household. But the selection of some of these gems, like you gave a couple of examples there, but if you get one of those older period style properties, there is an emotional attachment to those properties that remains in those two big cities that allow them to get that exceptional growth. But the other part of that is you've got to have cash flow, Ben, if you're buying some of those, because if you walk in some of the rooms in some of those properties and you step in the corner, the stumps might be a little bit shot, or there might be some little hidden surprises. At some point, you will actually have to put some capital expenditure into these properties. But generally speaking, it's that land value that you are buying here with the emotional period appeal that comes from these properties, or as you say, it could be a small boutique townhouse in close, established, that have been there for a little while. So it's interesting. It's not by accident that we've got this property purchase at that level. It's not for everyone. It's not the norm to have it at 1.3. But in this case, as you say, we're chasing growth. There's a cash flow advantage that they have from having higher disposable incomes that allows us to chase these particular assets. But over the journey, they are going to get an outperform result compared to the rest of the market, just given the nature of where they buy, what they're in proximity to, and what you said about the gross economic product of the surrounding metropolises nearby.
Yeah, I mean, if we summarize that in ultimate terms, the choice of people living where they live en masse is city locations, and the closer you get to the city and the productive use of that land is ultimately what's going to measure the land value. So by arguing that point, if we went for a lower capital growth and we went for a property that was out wider, unless you were basically subdividing that to turn apples into apple pie, but a like-for-like asset where there's no material change to the land, means that the land value in the inner city area must move before the land value in the outer suburb areas will move. That is irrefutable in terms of the way in which society measures and how people buy properties from a lifestyle point of view. So we've always said that, and so we'll continue to stick with 50 years of research, that type of performance. We'll sit comfortable with that. And to your point, yes, because there is a shortfall from a negative gearing point of view, that's also going to reduce the current tax payable at the moment. It's $133,000 a year for the couple. So that will potentially also bring down that tax payable amount as well. So I think that first purchase sets them up really well they've traded out of the big city. They're going to trade back in to have a property in one of those two bigger centres. I would suspect is where it's going to land for them. You could argue maybe Brisbane might come into that mix for a more significant house closer in. So that's not off the cards. It's all going to come down to timing of the market and what our demand supply scores are selling us around the different locations. But that just gives you a bit of an idea of that first purchase.
Yeah, likely to be a Victorian purchase for that one. And then the second one, Ben, is quite quickly. So another just under 12 months later, they purchased a second property at $800,000 with a lower growth rate of 6.75, but a higher cash flow at 3.25%. Now, what's interesting about this one is this is not essential. It's not essential purchasing. It's actually just an accelerator for the client should they want to do that. But it also highlights that principal place of residence, one investment property, and a combination of super could get this done for this couple. But we've actually factored in a second purchase. They can make the decision at that time whether that's necessary. But you can see we've factored a little more cash flow into that purchase so that we can use that to do some heavy lifting down the track for retiring out the debt, ready for them when they reach their desired retirement age of 55.
Now, one of the reasons why this becomes an optional purchase is because Annabelle Super is in a very, very healthy position. So whatever you're doing with your super, Annabelle, or how you got your super to that level, congratulations to you.
Yes.
We should obviously know we've never met this couple. Obviously, our advisors have worked with this couple. So hopefully we're relaying the story to their satisfaction. But the reality is yes, because her super is in such a healthy state, and obviously the contribution rates are going to continue to increase over time, the amount of properties that people need to hold for comfortable retirement. Remember, circling back 120,000 passive income by the age of 55. But here's how I put this one, Bryce. How do I summarize this? It's a beyond doubt purchase. So if you want to put your plan beyond doubt, meaning that if you want your money to work hard enough for you, this is a perfect beyond doubt purchase. So one plus super plus the savings that they were delivering, retiring that debt out, building that what we call a tidy buffer, because they're going to need a buffer. We'll come back to that in a minute in terms of because they're retiring early and don't get access to super. This is a beyond doubt purchase. So my view on this is when next year rolls around at an 800,000, because also we have, at the moment before we're starting our purchasing, we've got a global LVR of 44% across a $2 million existing owner-occupied property. So we've got the equity already there. So this one's about saying, well, once the first one's bedded down, once you've got a better line of sight on how your Airbnb is running, but if you want to put it beyond doubt, you can execute on this second purchase, and that will put you into a good stead. So $800,000 in today's dollar terms, which will be factored in a future value terms in terms of when we're going to buy that in September of next year, all going well. So yeah, definitely some food for thought there around that optional purchase, but I call it a beyond doubt purchase.
I like it, beyond doubt. So when they first moved into the principal place of residence, Ben, they put some money into renovating the extra income property. Yep. So that's been done to fund that income. Then they will put in a couple of, so we're talking back to sequencing here, they'll put in a couple of investment properties. Then the next step is that they, as part of their lifestyle by design, they want to expand the family. So there's provision here for the second child to come into their world late in 2023. And what that's done is factor a whole range of things too, Ben. All of the expenses, the childcare expenses, all of the schooling expenses. So reasonably cash flowing not only for the first child that they have, but also for the second child, which is an important part too, to make sure that they're doing real life as well as investing, right? So they've got to make sure that they have the provision, they have the cash flow, they have the household liquidity. So we've checked that in making the recommendations around when to purchase and the purchase price, because it obviously has an impact on lending and serviceability as well, Ben. So second child, late 23.
So if I can double click on that, usually we would be talking to couples about planning the property execution before the baby comes along, because obviously impact of servicing calculators and banks saying what's happening with maternity leave. In Annabelle's case, it was well documented that she would be able to perform some of her duties also whilst having Bubs number 2. So that also, again, reinforced the confidence around being able to sequence both the purchase and the child at the same time. And I think that's just important to, give the listeners and the audience some comprehension around that, because there might have been wait a minute, if I'm having a baby, I'm going down to single income. You've told us before going down to single income means it's going to impact borrowing power. In this particular case, we're in a position where the clients are able to also get some supplementary or ongoing continuation of income also during that maternity period.
Which is important. Later on in that same year, late September, Ben, there's also provision of $80,000 to put in a pool. So that's important. Again, part of lifestyle by design here in their property. And then a couple of years later, in late 25, there's a provision there for $300,000 worth of extensions to their existing house. So again, making sure they get all the big rocks in the jar, Ben, in the right order, so that they can still have it all that they want to do. So important things to think about there in their portfolio.
So Bryce, it's going to be fairly active over the next 24 months for this couple. I love the idea they're building a pool, buying a second investment property, having a baby. All of those things are really cool. Then they get a bit of breathing space before the renos. Where I wanted to go to next was around retiring effectively 9 years before they get access to super. And so we mentioned it earlier about sort of building up these buffers. And so with the pool, by way of example, we're actually going to pay cash for that. So there's no debt taken on that. And we like that, right? Because ultimately that's a lifestyle decision. It's a lifestyle purchase. So we don't really want to borrow money if we don't have to pay for the pool. But any type of investments that have deductibility around them, we obviously want to use leverage and debt to do those as well. So good story here for them around sort of putting those things together. And then in terms of when I look at the analysis on what I call the liquidity ratios and looking at the cash in bank in terms of what we've been able to build up over that time, what it does demonstrate quite comfortably is that the two properties and also the cash buffers that we're building up in offset accounts over that time does mean that before they do go into retirement, they are going to start to draw down on that savings, draw down on that cash flow surplus that they've got, and they'll feel relatively comfortable about that because it still leaves them in a very, very healthy position when we look at their models around how much they've actually got in reserve.
Yeah, it's significant, right? So that gives them that enormous confidence to go. For a lot of people, when they go backwards like that, they get nervous, whereas they can see they can trade out of that with their household cash position, and their loan to valuation and property loan to value ratios are definitely heading down as well. And you can see that there's big surpluses at times when we can make those strategic purchases as well, which you can take advantage of. So very important, Ben. A couple of things for this couple to think about is if we go back to the original reason for meeting with us, was the problem they were trying to solve was around making sure they don't get bogged down and stuck. So for this couple, it's always good to make sure they've got the plan, but they've got to back it up with the action. So the good news is they are currently in the process of fulfilling that, getting that property, that first purchase that we talked about, and getting that into their portfolio. And I think that'll be a really important milestone and something for our community to think about, Ben, because having the money map and the plan in place, that's good. But if that ends up in the bottom drawer, it's really been an exercise of giving you some comfort for a small period of time. But if you don't execute on it, there's no point, right? So this couple here, I think, should really start to celebrate once they do lock in that first purchase. And as you and I both know, they are in that process now of getting everything ready so that they can actually do that. But that is the hidden derailer for anyone with these particular circumstances. If your original reason for coming to talk to us was a little bit of indecision and procrastination, 5 years goes by pretty quick. I think the important point here is to make sure, okay, you act and you get into the market and you've got the right time horizon in place here, because that's the point where I think you can celebrate, not in the delivery of the plan. It's actually the first execution point within the plan to say, actually, I did overcome the very thing was the reason that I needed to make the invisible visible in the first place.
Yeah, and I think if you look at, household income, gross household income around that 400 and only taking 120 in retirement, they've obviously gone through a process of settling with, and when you're living in a lifestyle location like that, the joy and the value doesn't come in the money that you have. It comes in the experiences and the lifestyle that you lead. And it's free to swim on Australian beaches as we go to recording. In 50 years' time, who knows what's going to happen, right? Whether we go like some places in Europe, you've got to pay money to go on the beach, ridiculous. But you think about that. I don't think that's going to happen here, but I'm just sort of highlighting the fact that you don't need to have the same amount of income that you may have enjoyed during those earlier stages in life. So there is definitely a trade-off going on here. Now, if you do want to have that, then you just keep adding. You build on, so the 120 moves up to say 150, which then moves up higher, because there's still many, many years to go before they have to worry about that retirement and then basically making that money work for them. And they've got ample equity, ample cash flow, ample free cash flow that's also coming through. So if they want to, rather than putting it beyond doubt for 120, they want to stretch that story to a little bit higher, they can tweak that plan as they go. And I think it is important to understand when you're doing these long-term plans, they are, again, the freeway to tomorrow. But if you need to deviate or stop off for coffee and sandwiches and recalibrate what you're doing, that's completely okay. The point being is that it's giving you line of sight, it's giving you visibility, it's teaching you that you can be what you now can see. It's making the invisible visible. All of those lines that we often use around the value of getting advice. But it goes beyond that, Bryce, in terms of a lot of people who might be thinking that, I'm getting a property portfolio plan. No, you're not. You're actually getting a plan that is about designing all elements of your life. I mean, before they bought that property, did they realize there was going to be an Airbnb or a second property on that land? No. Well, that's new. Okay, how does that move into the equation? And then, okay, we're going to settle on having a second child. Okay, we've got a pool. We want to renovate and extend the existing home for a growing family. That is the essence of getting value out of doing an exercise like getting a professional involved in building out a plan. Because it's not just, okay, well, here you go. You can afford a $400,000 property and it's got to return this. Good luck. Cash flows look pretty good for the next couple of years. If it's not embedded into that lifestyle by design, all of the personal goals ingested in with the professional and financial goals that you're trying to do, it's not a complete life. It is not about money. It is about what money can offer you in terms of future choices, future opportunity, and being in control of your time, as you quite rightly point out, Bryce.
Well, it's a good point. You're lifting your eyes, right? Because people think about, because obviously in the current sentiment, Ben, people are thinking, well, okay, it's about making a transaction in a point of time, in a set of circumstances at a point in time, right? So it's easy to get bogged down in the minutiae of the detail and hearing the headlines. But what this has allowed you to do is go exactly what you said. We are going to be living through the next 5 years, the next 10 years, the next 15 years, the next 20 years. And there's going to be a whole bunch of significant milestones along the way that we need to plan for. So it's really important that we actually do lift our eyes, take a step back. If you're thinking about it from a drone looking at your life from, above, to then actually give you a roadmap. And as you say, you're going from A to B, but you might, your A to B might be different to my A to B, might be different to Annabelle and Jamie's A to B, but there is different nuances along the way that we need to plan for. So to think it's just about, okay, buying a property right now is seeing it too small. It's about sequencing. We've said it a couple of times now. It's about
and I can tell you, this is a lucky
big rocks in
couple.
the jar.
This is a lucky couple, Bryce. You know why? Because they're actually getting very close to buying close to the bottom.
Mhm.
Now, you can never pick the bottom. It's never easy to pick. But the fact that they're now in a purchasing window where the evidence is starting to suggest a flattening of the market. And we talked about this, several weeks ago on one of our episodes, where it turns so quickly in terms of, certainly in the bigger city market, absolutely turns on a knife in a sense that, bidding at auctions, there's starting to be a few more people turning up. I've got a bit more to say about this in what's making property news, but what will happen here is, even if it's not the complete bottom and there's still maybe 5% to go or 2% or 3% to go, you're not going to think about that in terms of you're happy that you've basically picked up the 10 that it's maybe pulled back in some markets, maybe maybe 15 in others, right? And so that's quite interesting in the sense that we've always said, go when you can go. Well, this couple, unfortunately for 5 years, basically, spun the wheel. Now they're actually going. And they just happen to be landing in a pretty good time to go. I mean, I wish they had gone 5 years ago, let's be honest, because they'd be 40 or 50% better off than they are today. Yeah. But you get where I'm coming from there. And it's just so happens that if anyone is, looking to plan something sooner rather than later, rather than kick the can down the road, waiting for the market to get better, well, there's going to be hordes of people in that market. And if you want to compete with them, you're going to be paying premiums pretty quickly. So if they execute on something in the next couple of months, I think they're going to look back in time and, in 10 years' time and say, you know what, if this was a timing discussion, we actually did pretty well.
Yeah, it's ironic when the market is at its most vulnerable and risky, people are quite happy to buy because it's a FOMO market. Yeah. But then when you have markets that are prime for opportunity, you get people wanting to pull back. It's just human nature. The thing, I'll try and get this quite right, but the thing that we learn about history is we don't really learn much about history, but like the same things keep happening over and over and over again.
Yeah. Benefit of hindsight, we often refer to it as, but hey, history does keep, if economic cycles continue to keep growing, then it means wealth continues to keep getting created. If wealth keeps getting created in the cities and locations that is underpinned by land value and productive use of that land, and then lifestyle elements and human interest and human behavior, that all builds on that. When you get all of those types of things, you think back to 20 years ago, why didn't I realize that? Yeah. Why didn't I realize that, that this was going to happen? When, basically GDP per capita keeps growing, then, in those particular areas and those countries, values are going to keep growing as well. So that's what underpins all of this. Ultimately, property prices in any society are valued on the success of the economic output of that particular country over the longer term. And I think that's an important message here also.
Stay tuned. We've got more about that on a future episode. But I think it's just human nature, Ben. We always think that this time's different, don't we? This time, but this ... but this time's different. And I think I've reflected on this a couple of times previously that first crisis I went through as a property investor was GFC. And I remember at the time, it was very difficult. I was helping other investors buy at the time, Ben. And it was very difficult when you're an investor who's feeling a little anxious yourself, and then you're trying to instill confidence in others when you've got that underlying anxiety and fear yourself. So that was the first time. But I guess now, having seen a number of those periods along the journey, I certainly feel like the trend is your friend, and I can rely on that because of, again, the time horizon that my investing is a part of. It's a long game, not a short game.
Yeah, and that's showing up in what we talked about before, Bryce, in the people who have been through this before, they're executing right now. Like, the customers that we're dealing with are repeat customers, confident customers, because they're playing the long game. And to our community, that's, as a firstie coming in and thinking about it, you want to be following the people who have had success behind them, right? And so I'd be encouraging you to think about that in terms of who are the apprehensive ones and who are the ones who are continuing to execute on their plan. And there are people like Bryce and myself who have been through a couple of cycles now. And, and that's multiplied by all of those other people who are, again, taking opportunity when others are fearful.
Jockey for position, folks, while there's not a bunch of folks around in line in front of you. It's a pretty good plan. The last thing on this plan here too, Ben, is defense. Now, if we've talked about the strength of the income in this household as being an important part of this plan, we've got to make sure that is underpinned. So there's a bunch of defense strategies around the property, but there's also a defense strategy around making sure the lifestyle exists here. So there's income protection insurance here. There's trauma and total and permanent disability. So if anything ever happens to either of the two income earners here, that is underpinned through having that defense strategy in place. And that's an important part. That's why it's the A, B, C, D. The D is the often forgotten part, but making sure that this becomes fulfilled at no risk to the entire family, but also young children involved here is really important. So that's been looked at, factored in, put into cash flows here as well. And those cash flows are factored in when deciding the purchase price of the investment properties and everything that's coming up in this couple's journey as well. So just a rounding out point here too, Ben.
Yeah, timely reminder that during accumulation phase of any household that's trying to create wealth, the biggest asset is not your property portfolio during that time. It's actually you and the income that you can generate. So if something was to happen where you can't generate that income, the property portfolio becomes at risk. So rather than insuring your car, which I still think you should do, the number one person that you should be insuring is the people who generate the income. And so that's why we obviously encourage the clients that we're planning with to get some modelling done around what those fees are. Now, of course, income protection, life trauma, TPD, some of them are lump sum payments, which buys you time. And you might have to divest on a few things because, your health is your wealth. But in other cases, they're providing up to 70% of your income that will hopefully get you through those difficult times and potentially help you retain your portfolio, as it becomes more and more evident that you're going to need that money because you may not be working into the future as well. So definitely, part of what we would say is our risk mitigation strategies, which links into defense.
Yeah, very good. So just a shout out to Annabelle and Jamie, not their real names, but your circumstances were unique and interesting, and some people will be able to relate to it in terms of the sea change, tree change that you got involved in, the working remote, the planning for families, getting the sequencing right on when you do the certain things. For some people, it's refreshing to know that you only really need to get a couple of investment properties. So there's a bit in there, Ben. But the main sort of frameworks that we talked about for our community that's been with us for a while is clearly big rocks in the jar. That's always one of the frameworks that we talk about. This particular process is a 5-step process. There was that clarify, then there was the evaluation, the plan, the implement, and the manage, and that's all part of this process. The 4 levers, so time, target, income, and expense. You can see the time and the target also included periods of when you can use super and periods of time when you can't use super, and surplus cash flows and what we're going to expend that on. And of course, investment grade assets. We took a bit of time talking about why we arrived at the price, which particular locations we would factor in on, and why that's important, particularly given that this particular couple moved out of a capital city job market with their principal place of residence, moved it into a lifestyle location, and why that was really important. And finally, Ben, the 4 steps of building a portfolio.
Yeah, which is, the time we've got to work on, which comes back to that time, target, lever. The sequencing, which is all around the cash flow modeling. So using our A, B, C, D, asset selection, borrowing power, cash flow management, defense. The price optimization, making sure you're not leaving any money on the table. If this amount of cash on cash return is magnified by optimizing for price, that's ultimately going to be in place. And then balancing that out with the risk profile, and then making sure that you've got enough runway and enough buffer in that story around, building out for that 15 years of planning that we've got to build it up, and then the 9 years where we don't get access to super. So let's wrap up. 2 investment properties in addition to super and cash savings that they're building up because of obviously their high incomes. 60,000, which correlates to 120,000 passive income, both retiring at 55 before they need to obviously get access to the super. So we've got a nice tidy buffer in that. And for those of you playing along at home, if you're interested, from today's dollar terms, at $120,000 equates to $174,154 when we index that for when retirement turns up in 15 years from now. So
big question that people have, Ben. Won't 120,000 be less today than it is in the future? We've covered that.
We've covered that. And of course, when remembering in your planning, whenever you're doing this and playing along at home, if you're going to buy future assets, you need to factor in future value of those assets and future debt of those assets. And then also make sure that you are basically aggregating all your offset balances. So that's why the real modeling becomes quite sophisticated if you are going to try and attempt this at home. But there you go. Another great case study example, really celebrating the success of clients who are taking action. And I'm big on not leaving money on the table, basically planning to become what you plan to become, although I don't think I actually said that, Bryce, but I'll take it. Thank you for saying it was mine.
Well, you've quoted it a bit, though.
I do quote it a lot because I think it works brilliantly. It's very simple to understand. And here we are with basically Annabelle and Jamie setting up for a tree change, sea change lifestyle, still getting their great incomes in their city locations. They're going to try it out. They're going to basically build a wealth portfolio that's going to put it beyond doubt for them in terms of financial freedom. So they'll move through financial control, which is what they've got now, into financial peace. Yes. And then maybe one day, as part of our 7 grades, they might just turn around and say, how else can we contribute back to society, and what else can we do as financial contribution?
And importantly, Ben, they'll nip the procrastination in the bud. They'll actually take action. They won't have any of those regrets anymore. And then they will learn that procrastination is the most expensive way that you will pay going forward if you do that too long. So they're going to nail it, knock it on the head, see it in an important time. So there you go, folks. Hopefully that's helped you. Again, send us a little note via socials or via our website on what sort of planning you'd like us to talk through, because we'd love to talk to the sequencing that's important to you. So we've done a couple of these. We're planning on doing many, many more on the Property Couch. We've got the summer series coming up to show some people. We're going to ask them live how they're feeling about their portfolios and investing in the current environment. So that's going to be super exciting. But I guess the important part here, Ben, is it's not just about what is the next property that I'm going to buy. It's actually about getting that money roadmap in place. And that takes a little bit of time. There's a bit of work to do with that. And if people are thinking about what this current sentiment, this current environment is about in terms of purchasing property, that's important. That's the execution piece, but it's also making the invisible visible. So there we go. Hey, my life hack today, Ben, is about your bucket list, right? So talking about lifestyle by design. So recently, my wife, Andrea, and I got the privilege of taking our kids on a bucket list item for us. We got to swim the Great Barrier Reef with the boys, which was just incredible, right? And what happened is we turned up and we got ready, and we the first 2 days when we were up there in far north Queensland, it was a bit windy, Ben. It was a bit windy, and from Victoria, I was landing. I was thinking, because you told me, Ben, because you've had a very checkered history. Is it checkered? Long history of.
I hope it's not checkered.
No, I don't know why that word came out. A long history involved in Hamilton Island in your previous life. And you'd said to me, Ben, quote, the best 2 months to be there is October and November. So based on you being very well informed, I'm thinking lock and load. I'm going to be warm. I'm going to be hot every single time I get there. Well, mate, the brochure wasn't right the first 2 days. It was windy and a bit rubbish. And so we get there and we line up, we're going out on the reef, and we get up there, and all of a sudden the operators, we thought they were moving us forward to get on the boat, Ben, but they said, sorry, folks, just letting you know we're cancelling today. It's too windy out on the reef. And we were disappointed. There's no doubt about that. But the exciting part for us was we had another swing at it, right? Because we had some days in the bank to be able to do it. Well, there was a couple of people who were on that, Ben, who they didn't have any margin at all. They said, this is not good news. We're about to get on a plane and leave tomorrow. This is our one chance. So my life hack today is leave a margin for booking days, if possible, at the beginning of the trip when you have got a bucket list item, because you need to be able to factor in that cancellation and rescheduling. First world problem, Ben. Some people might go, wow, Bryce, privileged problem to have. But I'm just saying that was a bucket list item that we wanted to fulfill with our family. If you've got some form of bucket list item that you want to fulfill with your family, make sure there's a little bit of margin factored in, Ben, so that you can factor for the weather. Because, Ben, you told me it was going to be sunny and it wasn't sunny those 2 days.
Did the wind slow down and the weather get better?
It got magnificent after that. I've got to say it was breathtaking, but those first 2 days it was a bit hairy. So there you go.
No, and I've been guilty of going on trips and getting to locations, and the experience that I want to do has been booked out. So I had a lot of that when we were going up through the Kimberley, because it was so busy.
Yes.
You just don't think of
super
booking.
highway when you went.
Yeah, it was absolutely flat. But if you haven't been into the Whitsundays, I'll put my old sales and marketing hat on, as I used to be the sales and marketing manager of Hamilton Island. It's one of the most beautiful, prettiest places on the planet. And if you can get out there for a twilight sail, or get out to Hardy Reef with the Fantasy Cruise mob, are they still called Fantasy Cruises? I'm probably trying to remember whether they've had a name.
I think they were, but we went on a fishing charter and caught a 26 kilogram Spanish mackerel. So it was the second biggest that charter had actually ever done. So there's a couple of nice little things that we did.
Oh yeah, that sounds great, and definitely great eating as well.
We turned it into sashimi, and one of the local restaurants cooked it up for us. Hey mate, what's making property news?
Well, there's a couple of things. So first and foremost, if I can just put on our Moorr hats. There's a couple of little things that are happening. We're really building momentum now. So Moorr's going to be offline potentially this Sunday. So we're going to send a notification out, but just I know this is date stamping it, but we've got a little upgrade, a little tweak that's happening. So if you're a Moorr user, you'll get it hopefully a correspondence on Friday, tomorrow, just letting you know that we're going to be offline for a few hours on Sunday as we effectively restructure. And we've got a few new features that I'll be talking about shortly. So that's just thank you for giving me that opportunity to talk about what's happening with Moorr. In terms of what's making property news, look, couple of important things here. Number one is around what we're seeing in auction clearance rates. And I wanted to make sure that it wasn't a flash in the pan in terms of where clearance rates were going. But it's very clear that the weighted auction clearance rate across the country is moving back up. And we had a good test last weekend. We basically in Melbourne, we had one of our biggest auction days just before, obviously, the Melbourne Cup. So we'd like to get in before that long weekend. And it passed that test, right? So we had over 2,000 properties go to auction. And over the past 7 weeks, we've had an end clearance rate, not an initial clearance rate, but a final clearance rate above 60%. Now, we've always talked about a balanced market being in that 60 to 65% clearance rate. That's a good litmus test for Melbourne and Sydney. Sydney's still sitting in that sort of 59 to 60 as final numbers, as reported by CoreLogic. So it just really is important to get an understanding that that might be an earlier indicator. And we're also seeing that the rate of, and we talked about this in our last update, the rate of decline, and with Tim, is starting to slow down. We're not bouncing off the bottom just yet, but in some markets, because remember, this is the global story of each of the bigger cities, there is definitely some markets that we're seeing in there that are performing okay. And when you look at, say, Perth and Adelaide are still doing quite well. Brisbane, it had such a big run, so that's got a bit to come off, but it's still in pretty good shape. So when you start to think about all these types of things, it's an early indicator. So I'm not calling it, but I'm just sort of saying that we're getting closer to feeling okay about this. Now, we've got probably another 25 basis points rise next week, and there still might be one more to come after that as well before we might take a pause. So we might get, obviously, November, December as Christmas presents. But as I've also said, and this is really important to note, that if we've got to slow down our consumer spending, we're spending too much. While we continue to keep spending, the government's going to, or the Reserve Bank is going to have to pull the reins in. And so how they're pulling the reins in is higher cash rates. So if we have a little bit of a, let's not spend as much at Christmas, everyone. If everyone just can commit to dropping $100 or $200 off their Christmas bill, that'll bring down retail spending, and then we won't see any further rate rise. But if we keep spending like we are, guess what? Rates are still going to keep going up. And that means as it's still going up, generally speaking, the bottom will continue to be pressured in terms of, pressure on prices. But the moment we find that bottom, that's when, and I suspect that's going to be Tim. Well, Tim said it, didn't he?
Called it.
Yeah, called it, that it will be early in the new year. We find that bottom and away we go. So if Tim's saying that sort of stuff, I'm listening. So that's number one. Number two, if the Council of Financial Regulators are listening, I'm coming after you. I've said it before on the podcast. I'll say it again. Having the buffer rate at 3% is putting people in mortgage prison who want to refinance potentially better deals and they can't. My only conclusion from that is whilst property prices have not dampened the wealth effect, meaning consumer spending hasn't slowed down, it means that's probably the only reason I could logically think of why they're holding the buffer rate at that level, because they still want to slow the economy down. They have to get inflation in check. So, but don't leave it too long, people, because what you don't want to do is put us into recession, because that'll change the mindset, too far. And ultimately that will mean we've got a slower recovery period.
There you go, folks. That's what's making property news today. Hopefully that's been helpful to you in terms of running through the planning of one of our clients. Again, let us know what you think. Have a think about time horizon, have a think about money plans for your own thinking on how you're planning as we lead into the shadows of Christmas this year, Ben. But until next week, mate.
Knowledge is empowering, Bryce, but only if you act on it.
Only if you act on it. See you next week, folks.
Hey guys, Bryce here again. Just want to catch you before you go and let you know, if you're new to our community, there are a lot of episodes to catch up on, but it's really important that you start from the very beginning at episode number 1, because episode 1 through to 20 share all of the foundational pillars and frameworks that you need to know to get the best out of listening to this podcast. So I'd recommend that you start there, and the little tip is to maybe start on 1.5 speed. Now, for those of you that are time poor and don't have time to go back from the beginning, don't worry, we've got you covered as well, because we've created a binge guide that goes through all of the details and makes it easy for you to read and get up to speed very, very quickly. So if you go to thepropertycouch.com.au/fast track, you will be able to download that binge guide and you will be up to speed in no time. And whilst you're there, I've got a few extra goodies for you, because we have our top 5 frameworks that you'll learn on this podcast, as well as the Make Money Simple Again ebook, which will help you with the foundations of basic money management, so you'll have everything you need to succeed in building your own lifestyle design and getting the best out of this podcast. Now, just a reminder that anything that we cover on this podcast is not considered financial advice. We certainly recommend that you get your unique circumstances looked at by your individual advisor, and everything we talk about is just general in nature. But folks, I want to encourage you again to go to thepropertycouch.com.au/fast track, and you can go and get all those goodies and catch up right away.